Rain drummed against the palace roof like war drums. Kneeling in the courtyard, Lord Renshiro held his katana point down, its blade buried in the mud, its reflection fractured by the storm. Around him, 12 retainers stood silent, faces veiled by Jingasa helmets, hearts veiled by duty. The air reeked of iron and incense, a battlefield disguised as ceremony. He had spoken words forbidden to samurai lips, that mercy was not weakness and obedience could be sin. Now, as dawn bled across the eaves, the shogun's banner swayed above him, black against gold. The captain stepped forward. His hand trembled. Renshiro's voice did not. Do it. Steel flashed, then halted. The world held its breath. And as thunder rolled over it, even the gods seemed to ask, what sin could drive a loyal man to defy the sun itself? Before the rebellion, before his name was whispered in the temples, Lord Renshiro had been a man of perfect order. His home rested at the edge of Kaga province, where mist rose from rice fields each morning, and the sound of temple bells bled into the cawing of crows. To those who served beneath him, Renshiro was the image of discipline, calm, deliberate, unshakable. He rose before the sun, performed chore, the morning bow, and drank his tea in silence. Even the way he folded his haori seemed precise enough to measure the wind. He believed in harmony, the fragile balance that held a nation together. Yet, beneath the calm surface of his world, cracks were forming. The shogun's new decree had reached Kaga like a blade slipped under a door. Peasants caught stealing grain, even to feed their children, were to be executed without trial. The message was written in gold ink, but it smelled of ash. That night, Renshiro read the decree beneath candlelight. The wax dripped onto the tatami as he traced the characters with his thumb, as though touching them could change their meaning. Outside, the wind moved through the bamboo grove, whispering like distant prayer. His wife, Akane, stood behind him, her hair tied simply, her eyes heavy with unease. "Will you obey it?" she asked. He didn't answer. The flame swayed between them, painting his face in halves, light and shadow. He had lived his life by one truth. That order preserved life. But the faces of the starving farmers returned to him in dreams. Children too weak to bow. Elders who smiled through hunger because defiance meant death. He had seen them kneeling by the road when the shogun's soldiers rode past, hands pressed to their foreheads in desperate gratitude for not being struck. When dawn came, Renshiro mounted his horse and rode through the fields. The harvest had failed again. The smell of rot clung to the wind. He stopped before a small shrine, its stone Jizo statue, half buried in mud. Someone had left a rice bowl there, cracked and empty, a single grain clinging to its side. He dismounted, knelt, and bowed. That grain, unbroken, defiant, caught the light like a tiny ember. It was then he knew. The empire had forgotten the weight of a single life. At noon, he returned to his estate and summoned his retainers. 12 men knelt before him, the most loyal among them. Their faces were disciplined masks, but their eyes betrayed fear. To question an order of the shogun was to walk willingly toward death. Renshiro unrolled the decree before them. "Tell me," he said, "is this justice?" Silence filled the hall. Only the rustle of the scroll answered him. One man dared speak. "My lord, justice is not ours to define. It is the shogun's will." Renshiro looked up. "Then what is a samurai's will?" The man bowed deeper, saying nothing. In that moment, the first thread of his fate began to unravel. That night, he stood once more at the threshold of his home. Akane appeared in the doorway, her voice barely above the wind. "Whatever you decide," she said, "decide it as the man you were. before the armor. He nodded once. From the far hills thunder echoed, distant yet approaching. It sounded like drums, and though he did not know it yet, by the next full moon, his name would be erased from the records of the shogunate and carved into the hearts of the people instead. Stories like this were not written. They were whispered across centuries, carried by wind and silence. If this tale of honor and defiance speaks to you, let it reach beyond time. Subscribe and tell me, from what land do you listen to the fall of rain upon the armor of men who dared to stand? The rain did not stop for 7 days. It fell over the paddies like grief made visible, turning the soil to sludge and the sky to silence. Lord Renshiro rode beneath it, the hood of his straw cloak heavy with water, his horse's steps sinking deep into the earth. The village ahead was nothing more than a collection of huts clinging to the hillside, smoke rising thinly from the few hearths that still burned. These were the people the decree condemned, the nameless, the unseen. When he arrived, the air was thick with rot and fear. Children hid behind half-collapsed fences. The peasants bowed so low, their foreheads touched the mud. A single samurai banner fluttered before the grain storehouse, a white circle on black cloth, the mark of the shogunate. 2 soldiers stood guard outside, their faces indifferent, their hands resting lazily on their katana hilts. Inside the storehouse, the scene was worse. Dozens of sacks lay torn open, their contents spilled across the floor like entrails. 3 men knelt before an officer, bound by rope at the wrists. They were farmers, ribs sharp beneath their skin, eyes sunken and desperate. The officer looked up when Renshiro entered. He saluted, rain dripping from his armor. "My lord," he said, "we caught them stealing the shogun's grain. They will hang at sunset." Renshiro's gaze drifted to the prisoners. One of them, an old man, could barely lift his head. His lips trembled as he whispered, "We took only what was lost to the rats." The rice was dying. So were we. The officer's jaw tightened. Mercy invites chaos. The shogun's law is absolute. For a long moment, Renshiro said nothing. His hand rested on the pommel of his sword, fingers motionless. Then quietly he said, "Release them." The officer blinked, uncertain he'd heard correctly. "My lord, you heard me." A faint tremor passed through the room, the sound of disbelief. "But the decree, I have read the decree," Renshiro interrupted, "and I have seen the famine. The shogun governs to protect life, not extinguish it." The soldiers hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. No one moved. Renshiro stepped closer, his voice a calm blade. "If you will not obey me, then disobey your conscience instead. Which weighs heavier?" The officer swallowed, then drew his sword, but not to strike. He sliced through the ropes binding the peasants, his hand trembling. The freed men collapsed, weeping into the dirt. Outside, thunder rumbled. Renshiro turned toward the door. "Distribute half the grain to the villagers," he ordered. "Leave the rest for the shogun's levy. Let him see that mercy feeds loyalty better than fear." When he rode away, the rain lightened, though the clouds remained. Behind him, he could feel the weight of unseen eyes, some grateful, others terrified. Acts of compassion had always been dangerous in times ruled by cruelty. By nightfall, word had spread beyond the valley. In taverns and temples, whispers grew. A samurai defied the shogun's decree. Some said he was mad. Others called him righteous. The truth was simpler. He had seen hunger and chosen to act as a man before acting as a soldier. But truth in the empire was a flame too bright to last. 2 days later, a messenger arrived at his estate. The man's armor bore the crimson crest of Edo, the shogun's personal guard. He carried no letter, only a lacquered box, sealed with black wax. Renshiro took it without a word. When the messenger left, he broke the seal. Inside was a single object, his own family crest, carved from wood and split clean down the middle. His wife, Akane, covered her mouth. "They mean to strip you of your title." He set the broken crest on the tatami between them. The faint scent of cedar rose as the two halves drifted apart. "It seems," he said quietly, "the shogun has noticed my compassion." That night, he walked through his garden in silence. Lanterns swayed in the wind, their light trembling on the koi pond. Somewhere within the reeds, a night heron called, lonely, persistent. He thought of the three peasants kneeling in the rain, of the old man's voice breaking under the weight of his plea. Mercy had always been the province of gods, not men, and yet it was men who bled for the lack of it. In the distance, he heard hooves. Another rider, another message. He did not need to open it to know what it would say. The shogun's order was absolute. Lord Renshiro was to present himself at Edo within 10 days to answer for insubordination. He looked to the horizon, where the mountains cut the sky like teeth. A storm was gathering again, and as the wind rose, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine, he whispered the words his father once told him before his first battle. "Even a leaf can defy the storm, if it knows how to fall." The road to Edo wound like a scar across the land. Rain had given way to cold wind, and the air smelled of cedar and distance. Lord Renshiro rode alone, his armor wrapped in black cloth to hide its crest, a symbol now forbidden. For 2 days, he spoke to no one. The weight of his decision pressed heavier than the sword at his side. Villages blurred by, faces turned away, doors closed before he could even ask for shelter. In a land ruled by fear, even kindness became treason. Near dusk on the 3rd day, he found a boy kneeling beside the road, his horse dead beside him. The boy wore the gray robes of a courier, torn at the knees and stained with dust. A broken arrow jutted from the saddle. When he saw Renshiro approach, he bowed so low, his forehead touched the dirt. "Lord Renshiro," the boy said, voice trembling, "I was sent from Edo to find you." Renshiro dismounted slowly. His hand hovered over his sword, not from threat, but habit. "You know my name." The boy nodded. "I serve the Ministry of Records. I was ordered to deliver a summons, but—" He hesitated, glancing at the horse. Bandits attacked. They took the message. Renshiro studied him. The boy could not have been older than 16. His hands were cut from reins and rope. Yet his eyes, dark, unyielding, held something Renshiro recognized. Duty. "What is your name?" "Daichi, my lord." "Daichi," Renshiro repeated, as if testing the sound. "Then you've already fulfilled your mission. The shogun's will reached me before you did." The boy looked confused. "You mean the summons?" Renshiro's gaze turned toward the mountains. "No, the warning." For a moment, silence reigned between them, broken only by the creaking of armor and the rustle of wind through the pines. Then Renshiro turned his horse toward the horizon. "Edo is far, and the path grows darker each day. Ride with me, my lord. Your horse is dead. Your orders are ashes. Now your duty is survival." The boy hesitated only a breath before nodding. "Yes, my lord." They rode side by side as the day faded. Daichi spoke little, but his eyes absorbed everything. The way Renshiro's posture never wavered, how he rode without fear, how every pause before a sentence carried thought instead of hesitation. As night fell, they reached a wayside shrine. A crumbling Buddha sat half buried beneath moss, its face eroded by centuries of rain. Renshiro dismounted and placed a single copper coin at its feet. Daichi watched him, unsure whether to pray. "Do you believe the gods still watch us?" the boy asked. Renshiro smiled faintly. "They watch. They just stopped interfering." He unrolled his travel mat and stared into the fire. The orange light flickered across the steel of his blade, his katana, named Kiyosada. "This sword," he said quietly, "has ended many lives. But only now do I wonder if it ever saved one." Daichi's brow furrowed. "You saved those farmers, didn't you?" Renshiro looked into the flames. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I only delayed their deaths. The shogun will not forgive compassion. Men like him mistake fear for order." The boy hesitated. "Then why go to Unyielding at all?" "Because silence is worse than death." He let the fire burn low. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long, mournful. The boy shivered, drawing his cloak tighter. By morning, frost had glazed the grass. Renshiro awoke before dawn, sharpening his blade with slow precision. Daichi stirred beside him, eyes red from little sleep. "My lord," the boy said, "if they call you traitor, what will you do?" Renshiro paused mid-stroke. "A traitor serves the truth that power fears. If that is my fate, I will wear it as armor." They rode again, and by midday reached the border outpost. The gate guards stiffened at the sight of Renshiro's armor, recognizing the shape of its plating, even without a crest. One of them stepped forward. "You are Lord Renshiro of Kaga." "I was." The guard exchanged looks with his men, uncertain. "We were told to expect you, and to escort you to Edo, by order of the shogun behind them." Daichi tensed, his hand unconsciously drifting to the hilt of his short sword. Renshiro noticed, and shook his head once, calm, deliberate. "There will be no need," he said. "I know the road." But the guards insisted. All 4 riders joined them, forming a silent procession. The group moved east, dust rising beneath the hooves, the banners of the shogun flapping in rhythm like black wings. As they entered the mountain pass, Daichi leaned close and whispered, "My lord, if they mean to kill you—" Renshiro cut him off with a glance. "Then you will witness how a man meets his end." Daichi's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to say something that could change the tide of fate, but words failed. The old stories he'd grown up hearing, of honor, of duty, of noble death, all felt smaller now, walking beside the man who lived them. By twilight, they reached the ridge overlooking Edo Bay. The city stretched below, like a sea of lanterns, bright and distant, indifferent to the souls drawn toward its center. Renshiro stopped his horse and looked down in silence. The wind caught his hair, the sky bleeding red into violet. Daichi saw it then. The calm not of a man resigned to death, but of one who had already accepted the price long ago. He understood why people called him a lord, even without a title. Some men were born to obey the storm, others were born to face it. Ida welcomed them with silence disguised as order. The city stretched wide beneath gray skies, roofs tiled like scales on a sleeping beast. Flags of the shogunate lined the streets, fluttering in perfect rhythm, as though even the wind obeyed command. Drums echoed from the castle walls, slow, deliberate, like the heartbeat of an empire that refused to die. Renshiro and Daichi passed through the southern gate, escorted by the 4 riders. The guards bowed but did not speak. Peasants and merchants stepped aside, their eyes lowered, as if afraid to witness rebellion in human form. When they reached the outer courtyard of Edo Castle, the boy could not hide his awe. The walls rose higher than mountains, carved from white stone veined with moss. Soldiers stood in pairs along every path, their armor black as ink. "Does peace always look so afraid?" Daichi whispered. Renshiro's gaze stayed forward. Peace bought by fear is a blade turned inward. They were led to a small guest house within the compound, too fine to be a cell, too quiet to be anything else. That night, no one brought food, only water and silence. Daichi tried to rest, but his thoughts would not still. He turned to his lord, who sat by the paper window, eyes reflecting the lantern's faint glow. "My lord, if they mean to execute you, why summon you first?" Renshiro's voice was calm. "Because tyranny loves ceremony. The shogun will not kill me as a criminal, but as an example." A pause. Then he added, "And examples must have witnesses." The next morning, they were summoned to the inner court. The hall was vast, tatami floors polished to glass, incense thick in the air. At the far end, behind a bamboo screen, sat the shogun's regent, Lord Itsukawa, the man who truly ruled Edo, while the aging shogun lived behind curtains of illness and myth. Itsukawa's face was smooth, almost delicate. His smile, when it came, was that of a man who sharpened knives with words. "Lord Renshiro of Kaga," he began softly, "your service to the empire has been noted. And now, so has your deviation." Renshiro bowed, neither humble nor defiant. "If compassion is deviation, then I have erred." The regent's smile widened. "Compassion? Tell me, when you fed those peasants, did you believe hunger was an act of nature?" Renshiro frowned. "What else could it be?" Itsukawa leaned forward, eyes glinting. "You served at the border. You saw the fields burn after the tax collectors came. Do you truly think the famine struck by chance?" A murmur rippled through the hall. Daichi stiffened. "The shogun's levy," the regent continued, "is not meant to sustain the empire. It is meant to cleanse it. Weakness breeds rebellion, and rebellion breeds ruin. The hungry are easier to rule when their mouths are too empty for words." The realization hit like cold steel. Renshiro's hand twitched toward his sword, then stilled. "You starved them to preserve control." Itsukawa nodded, unashamed. "The shogun believes mercy invites chaos. Fear keeps the provinces loyal. Order requires sacrifice. I watched my own province burn when men forgot fear," he added quietly. "Since then, I've trusted fear more than virtue." Renshiro's voice darkened. "Order without humanity is not rule. It is rot." The regent sighed. "And rot must be trimmed before it spreads. You will confess your disobedience before the council tomorrow. Your death will be swift, your honor preserved. Resist, and your clan will vanish from the records." He gestured to Daichi. "As for the boy, couriers are easily replaced." Daichi's pulse hammered in his chest. Renshiro stepped in front of him, calm but unyielding. "The boy is under my protection." "Then he shall die with you," Itsukawa said, smiling thinly. They were dismissed without guards. None were needed. Renshiro walked in silence until they reached the garden beyond the hall. The air there smelled of pine and wet stone. He stopped beneath a maple tree just beginning to shed its leaves. Daichi's voice broke first. "You knew they'd kill you. Why come at all?" "To witness the truth," Renshiro said. "A man can die in ignorance or die seeing clearly. I chose the latter." The boy clenched his fists. "Then let's run. We can leave Edo tonight, vanish into the provinces." Renshiro shook his head. "Run, and the story ends with me. Stay, and it might outlive us." Daichi fell silent. The leaves whispered overhead, red drifting into brown. After a long pause, Renshiro unsheathed his katana. The blade caught the pale light, immaculate, flawless. He looked at his reflection in it, then at Daichi. "This sword once served a master. I believed righteous. Tomorrow, it will serve only truth." He pressed the hilt into the boy's hands. "Take it." Daichi froze. "My lord, I—" "Take it," Renshiro repeated. "A blade without purpose is just metal. When I fall, carry this to those who remember me. Tell them what you saw, not what they will write." The boy's hands trembled as he accepted the sword. It felt too heavy, too sacred to hold. Renshiro smiled faintly. "You asked why the gods no longer interfere. Perhaps they wait for mortals to remember courage." They stood beneath the maple tree as the evening bell tolled through Edo, a sound that marked not time, but endings. In the shadows beyond the walls, unseen eyes watched. One of Itsukawa's spies knelt, listening. He did not need to hear the words. The silence told him enough. By nightfall, the regent knew the boy had been armed. By dawn, Renshiro would be condemned not just as a traitor, but as a rebel. And yet the boy did not flee, because for the first time, Daichi understood what his master meant by truth, that power fears. The night before judgment smelled of rain and rust. Inside his quarters, Lord Renshiro sat motionless before the window. The faint glow of Edo's lanterns painting ghostly reflections across the paper walls. Outside, the palace slept under watchful silence, a silence heavy with the knowledge of what dawn would bring. Daichi had fallen asleep beside the doorway, sword across his knees. His breathing was shallow, uneven. Every time thunder rolled, he stirred, as if expecting footsteps. Renshiro watched him for a long time, his thoughts quiet but relentless. He remembered the first time he held a sword, how his master told him that a blade was not meant to kill, but to reveal. What a man defends shows who he truly is. For decades, he had lived by that creed. Yet now, in the stillness of his final night, he wondered if he had mistaken defiance for virtue. Was mercy still noble, if it brought ruin to those you swore to protect? He turned the question over in his mind, like a blade catching the moonlight, every angle sharper than the last. At midnight, the paper door slid open. 2 men stepped inside, cloaked in black. One bowed low. "My lord, the regent requests your presence." Privately, Renshiro rose without a word. Daichi stirred, hand gripping the sword. But Renshiro raised a hand, calm, commanding, "Stay." He followed the men through narrow corridors until they reached a small tea chamber overlooking a koi pond. There, Lord Itsukawa awaited, alone. The regent poured 2 cups of tea, his hands steady, his smile gentle. "I thought you might appreciate one last moment of peace," he said. Renshiro remained standing. "Peace is a poor disguise for guilt." Itsukawa chuckled softly. "And yet, it suits you. Sit, Lord Renshiro. Even condemned men may taste bitterness before death." After a pause, Renshiro sat. Steam coiled from the cups, delicate and ghost-like. "You are admired, you know," Itsukawa said, almost kindly. "Even those who will witness your execution tomorrow speak your name with respect. That is why I offer you a choice." Renshiro's gaze hardened. "A choice born of mercy or convenience?" "Both," Itsukawa replied. "Confess publicly that your rebellion was born from grief, that you were misled by false reports of famine. Do so, and the shogun will spare your clan. Deny it, and Kaga will be purged." For the first time, Renshiro's composure wavered. Akane's face flashed in his mind. Her quiet smile, the way she looked at him the night he left. He thought of his retainers, of the peasants who had bowed to him, of the children who had watched his horse disappear beyond the hills. If he confessed, they would live. If he stood by the truth, oh, they would burn. For a moment, he saw Akane's hands in his memory, steady as she poured his morning tea, her silence sharper than any counsel. He wondered if she would understand this final disobedience, or if it would break her heart the way it was breaking his own. Itsukawa sipped his tea. Even a righteous man must sometimes kneel to protect what he loves. That too is duty. Renshiro's jaw tightened. You speak of duty as if it were a leash. Perhaps it is, but it keeps the dogs from devouring one another. For a long time, neither spoke. Then quietly, Renshiro reached for the cup before him. The tea trembled slightly as he lifted it. He stared into it, the reflection of his own eyes distorted by the surface. You would have me lie to save lives, he said. To preserve order, Itsukawa corrected. Renshiro set the cup down, untouched. Order is a cage, Lord Itsukawa, and men like you mistake the sound of their chains for harmony. The regent's smile faded. Then you choose death. I choose meaning. Itsukawa stood. His expression had turned cold, almost weary. Meaning is a luxury for those who die alone. He gestured to the guards. Return him to his quarters. When Renshiro returned, Daichi was awake. The boy's eyes widened at the sight of him. What did he want? Renshiro removed his armor piece by piece, setting it carefully beside the wall. He offered me life at the cost of truth. And you refused? Renshiro nodded. Daichi's voice rose, trembling. Then what of your people? Your wife? Do they deserve to suffer for your pride? The words struck harder than steel. Renshiro turned to him, not in anger but in pain. You think this is pride? The boy's breath hitched. Isn't it? For a long time, Renshiro said nothing. Then he walked to the window and slid it open. Cool air spilled into the room, carrying the scent of rain. When I was your age, he said quietly, I watched my master kneel before a tyrant and lie to save his retainers. The tyrant lived. The clan endured. But their honor died that same day. For 30 years, I've watched men call that survival. Tell me, Daichi, what do you call it? The boy lowered his gaze. I call it mercy. Renshiro smiled sadly. Then may the world forgive me for never learning it. A flash of lightning split the sky, throwing both their faces into stark relief, youth and resolve, age and weariness. The rain began again, soft at first, then steady. Daichi turned away, his throat tight with helplessness. He wanted to hate his master for his stubbornness, but all he felt was grief. He understood now what kind of courage this was, the kind that left nothing behind but its echo. That night, while Renshiro meditated before the candle, Daichi sat in the dark, clutching the sword his master had given him. He thought of escape, of rebellion, of vengeance. But above all, he thought of the words that would outlive them both. Truth that power fears. And somewhere deep within, the first ember of defiance began to burn, not in the master, but in the student. Outside, thunder rolled toward dawn. The rain stopped just before dawn, leaving the air raw and metallic. When the guards came for him, Lord Renshiro did not resist. He rose, bound his hair, and fastened his kimono with calm precision. Every gesture deliberate, ritualistic, as though he were preparing not for death, but for ceremony. Daichi stood by the door, pale and trembling. My lord, he whispered, there must still be a way. Renshiro cut him off gently. There is always a way, Daichi, but not always one we can live with. The boy lowered his gaze, unable to speak. Two soldiers entered, armor lacquered and wet with mist. One of them extended a folded white garment. The shogun commands that you face judgment wearing this robe. Renshiro accepted it wordlessly. It was silk, pure, immaculate, a color meant for both purity and death. As he tied the sash, Daichi realized with a shiver that even execution was a ritual of aesthetics here. The empire demanded beauty from every tragedy it caused. They led him through the corridors toward the inner courtyard. The morning light bled pale through the paper screens, catching in his hair like frost. Outside, hundreds had gathered, officials, monks, soldiers, and courtiers. The murmur of voices was low but restless, like waves against stone. At the far end of the courtyard stood a raised wooden platform, the shirasu, where executions of rank were held. Upon it, a black mat awaited. The regent Itsukawa was already there, serene beneath his parasol. His robes were white, but his hands, clasped before him, were stained faintly with ink. He had signed the order himself. "Lord Renshiro," he said, voice carrying easily across the courtyard, "you stand accused of insubordination and treason. Do you deny these charges?" Renshiro looked up, eyes steady. "I deny nothing. I merely confirm what your empire fears most. That obedience without honor is not strength, but cowardice." A whisper rippled through the crowd. The regent's expression did not change. "Then you die not as a lord, but as a warning." Renshiro bowed. "All warnings are seeds. Even poison grows." Itsukawa's jaw tightened. He gestured to the soldiers. "Proceed." The executioner stepped forward, dressed in red, the color of final duty. In his hands gleamed the katana reserved for seppuku assistants, its edge bright as moonlight. Daichi, held back by two guards, could not look away. He saw his master kneel upon the mat, movements slow, deliberate, almost graceful. Renshiro adjusted his posture, then spoke, not to the regent, but to the watching crowd. "When rulers forget mercy," he said, "they create ghosts that no blade can silence. Remember that when the next decree demands your conscience." He reached for the small dagger the tanto placed before him, and drew it from its sheath. The blade trembled faintly in the light. Daichi's heart stopped. Every instinct screamed for him to move, to stop it, but his legs refused. Then suddenly, chaos. A shout, a blur of motion. One of the guards holding Daichi stumbled as the boy broke free, drawing the sword Renshiro had given him. The steel flashed. "Stop!" Daichi cried, voice raw. "This is no justice." The courtyard erupted. Soldiers closed in. The boy swung wildly, fear and fury in every stroke. One soldier fell. Another caught his arm and twisted hard. "Daichi!" Renshiro's voice rang through the commotion, sharp, commanding. The boy froze. "Enough," Renshiro said. "Do not stain this act with desperation." Daichi's breath came ragged. "They'll kill you." Renshiro gave a faint smile. "They already have." He looked to the regent, then to the boy. "Remember what I told you. A story dies when no one dares to speak it." Guards seized Daichi, dragging him back. He struggled, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on his face. In the scuffle, the sword slipped from his hands, vanishing beneath the trampling feet. He never saw where it fell, only that the steel's last glint disappeared into the storm of men. Renshiro turned his gaze to the blade in his hands. His reflection looked calm, almost serene. He whispered something no one could hear, then drove the tanto into his abdomen, straight and sure. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. The executioner stepped forward instantly, his blade rising and falling in one smooth arc. The sound was soft, a whisper, not a cry. When it was over, the courtyard was silent. The regent stood still for a moment, then turned to the guards. "Burn everything." His words, his clothes, even his ashes. Let no trace of him remain. But something in his voice betrayed unease. As the crowd dispersed, Daichi knelt beside the empty platform, his wrists still bound. Blood had darkened the edges of the mat, seeping into the wood grain like ink. He bowed until his forehead touched the floor. In that silence, he understood. The shogun could erase a name, but not the echo it left behind. When the guards pulled him to his feet, he met Itsukawa's eyes. The boy's gaze no longer trembled. "You can't burn what already lives inside men," he said quietly. The regent said nothing, but for the first time he looked away. That night, the fires of cremation burned outside Edo. The smoke rose high into the gray sky, merging with the clouds, and as the wind carried it eastward, the people of Kaga looked up, sensing something they could not name, a stirring, faint but unbroken. The morning after the execution, Edo smelled of rain and ash. Daichi awoke in a wagon, wrists bound, the road beneath him jolting with every turn of the wheels. Outside, mist swallowed the landscape, the kind of pale gray that erased distance and time alike. Two guards rode alongside, their armor dull from the night's humidity. He didn't ask where they were taking him. He already knew. Back to Kaga, to deliver the warning his master had become. When they stopped at a small checkpoint near the river, one guard dismounted to drink. The other remained by the wagon, drowsy from exhaustion. Daichi studied the rope binding his wrists, thin hemp, frayed from the rain. Slowly, deliberately, he began to twist his hands, letting the moisture soften the fibers. The first guard returned, muttering, "The regent says to burn the body's remains at the coast. No burial, no shrine." Daichi's pulse quickened. No shrine, no name. The rope gave way with a soft snap. He waited until the cart rattled over a stone bridge, the sound masking his movement. And then he lunged. The guard turned too late. Daichi struck him with his bound hands, knocking him sideways. The second shouted, reaching for his sword, but the boy dove into the river below. Cold enveloped him instantly. The current dragged, tore, swallowed. When he surfaced, gasping, the world was a blur of fog and foam. The wagon and its guards vanished behind the mist. He let the river carry him until the current slowed. Crawling onto the muddy bank, he collapsed among reeds in silence. For a long time, he lay there, staring at the pale sky. He thought he saw shapes in the clouds, faces perhaps, or just tricks of exhaustion. But one seemed clear enough. Renshiro's calm gaze, unbending even in death. By nightfall, Daichi reached the edge of the forest. His clothes clung to him like a second skin, heavy with mud and grief. Yet something in him had changed. The fear that once guided him was gone. In its place, a slow, deliberate fire. He remembered the sword, the one his master had given him. He'd lost it during the struggle. The thought hollowed him. For samurai, a sword was soul. For him, it was proof that truth had existed once. He needed it back. That night, Daichi crept through the outskirts of Edo, moving like a shadow among traders and beggars. The cremation site lay near the eastern shore, guarded but quiet, just a few soldiers warming themselves by a dying fire. Beyond them, a pyre still smoked, the last embers glowing faintly beneath the rain. He waited until the guards drifted to sleep. Then, he approached the ashes. The ground was soft, steaming faintly. He knelt and sifted through the charred remains. Fragments of wood, pieces of fabric, the faint glint of metal. His fingers found it, the hilt of Kiyosada, scorched but intact. The blade itself was gone, melted into darkness, but the hilt still bore the faint engraving of the Matsuda crest, a broken phoenix. He held it to his chest, footsteps behind him. "Step away," a voice ordered. Daichi froze. A guard stood there, sword half drawn. The boy turned slowly, hands raised. "He was my master." The soldier hesitated. His eyes softened just a little. Then you shouldn't be here. They will hang you if they find you, I know, Daichi said. But a man deserves at least one witness. The guard looked at him for a long moment. Then, wordlessly, he sheathed his sword and turned away. Go, and forget what you saw. Daichi bowed deeply. No, I will remember. He left before dawn, carrying the scorched hilt wrapped in cloth. Each step away from Edo felt heavier than the last. But he no longer walked as a courier of orders. He walked as a courier of truth. By the time he reached the mountains, word of Renshiro's defiance had already begun to spread. Whispered from traveler to monk, soldier to farmer, the tale changed shape, but not essence. A samurai spoke against the shogun and died standing. Villagers lit candles at crossroads, leaving bowls of rice before small Jizo statues. Some placed folded paper, marked only with a single brushstroke, a broken circle, the mark of unfinished truth. Daichi watched these offerings in silence. The people didn't know his face, but when they bowed before those candles, he bowed with them. One evening, he stopped at a temple overlooking the valley. An old monk greeted him, eyes bright beneath his hood. You've come far, traveler. Daichi unwrapped the hilt, showing it with reverence. It belonged to a man who defied heaven for the sake of men. The monk's gaze lingered. Then you carry more than metal. You carry memory. And memory, young one, is sharper than steel. Daichi placed the hilt upon the altar. I was told to forget. The monk smiled faintly. Then start remembering louder. That night, Daichi lit incense before the altar and bowed low. Smoke curled upward, twisting like the spirit of his master, ascending through wind and fire. As he closed his eyes, he whispered the words Renshiro had left him. A story dies when no one dares to speak it. And for the first time, he understood their meaning fully. Snow began to fall before winter's proper arrival, thin, hesitant flakes that dissolved the moment they touched the ground. Daichi had taken refuge in a mountain temple near the border of Kaga. The place was half abandoned, its roof sagging, its bells long silent. Inside, only the wind spoke, whistling softly through the slats, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone. He sat before the altar, the scorched hilt of Kiyosada resting across his knees. Every night, he sharpened his resolve, as though it were the blade itself. But resolve could not cut through fear, only through silence. For weeks he had wandered between villages, spreading the story in whispers of Lord Renshiro, who defied the shogun and died standing. Some bowed in secret gratitude. Others warned him to stop before the wrong ears heard. And then, one morning, they did. The temple door slid open without sound. Snow drifted in behind 3 armored men, soldiers of the shogunate. Their armor bore no banners, only the faint outline of the black sun crest. The first stepped forward. You are Daichi of Kaga? The boy rose slowly. I am no one. That is true, the soldier replied coldly. The regent says, no such person exists. Yet your words travel farther than your feet. You speak of a man who never lived. Daichi's heartbeat steadied. Then why send swords to silence a ghost? The soldier's eyes narrowed. Because even ghosts can raise rebellions. He unsheathed his katana. The sound cut through the still air like a verdict. Daichi glanced toward the altar. The incense from his morning prayer still smoldered faintly, a thin thread of smoke rising to the rafters. He thought of his master kneeling in the courtyard, of the stillness before the final strike. If fear was the chain that ruled men, then silence was the forge that made it. He took the hilt in both hands. My lord died for truth, he said quietly. I will not live for less. The soldier sneered. A courier pretending to be a samurai. Daichi's grip tightened. A boy carrying the courage your empire lost. The first strike came fast. A horizontal slash Zhao aimed to maim. Daichi ducked, the motion clumsy, but fueled by desperation. He thrust upward with the broken hilt, striking the soldier's chin. The impact sent him staggering back, blood spraying into the snow. The others advanced. The boy moved instinctively, dodging, stumbling, grabbing for fallen weapons. He caught the first man's wakizashi and turned it clumsily, parrying a second blow. The steel rang, shrill, metallic, real. In the reflection of the blade, he saw his own eyes, not filled with rage, but purpose. The fight was brief and brutal. By the end, Daichi knelt in the snow, blood on his sleeve and breath in tatters. Two soldiers lay still. The third crawled toward the door, leaving a trail behind him. Daichi dropped the blade. His hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what he had done. Violence had always been something that happened to him, never something he returned. Now he understood the look in his master's eyes, the sorrow that followed necessity. He stepped outside. The storm had strengthened. Flakes fell thick now, blanketing the world in white. Each breath turned to vapor, vanishing as quickly as it formed. At the edge of the forest, a figure approached, an old monk from the valley. He had seen the smoke, perhaps, or the noise of steel. "What have you done, child?" the monk asked, voice heavy with both awe and grief. "I've chosen," Daichi said simply. He knelt and placed the broken hilt into the snow before him, bowing his head. "My master died for truth. I fought for memory. But truth without witness is only wind." The monk's eyes softened. "And what will you do now?" Daichi looked toward the horizon, east, where the faint glow of Edo still haunted the sky. "I will go where silence is law," he said, "and break it." That night, he burned the temple. Not in hatred, but in tribute. The flames rose high into the snow, painting the mountain red and gold. The heat stung his eyes, yet he did not look away. Fire was how the empire cleansed rebellion. Now it would carry one instead. As dawn broke, villagers across the valley saw the smoke. Some crossed themselves in prayer. Others whispered the name that the shogun had tried to erase. By noon, soldiers arrived at the ruins. But Daichi was gone. Only the scorched mark of a phoenix remained in the snow, carved with the tip of a blade before the fire took it. Days later, in the southern provinces, the same symbol began appearing on temple doors, on rice barrels, on scraps of parchment left at shrines. The people called it Hinoe, the mark of the rising flame. No one knew who drew it. Some said a spirit walked among them. Others said the dead lord had returned. But in hidden corners by candlelight, a boy's voice told the story again and again, of a man who refused to kneel, of mercy called rebellion, of honor that outlived death. And those who listened began to whisper back, not prayers, not names, but promises. Winter deepened. The empire slept beneath white silence. Weeks passed since the fire on the mountain, yet the smoke it raised refused to fade, not from the sky, but from memory. Across the provinces, whispers stirred like wind through reeds. A lord who defied the shogun, a boy who carried his last words, a flame that would not die. The shogunate tried to erase them both. Edicts were issued. Temples were searched. Those who spoke the name Renshiro were branded with ink and shame. But truth has a way of disguising itself, not as rebellion, but as prayer. Monks recited new sutras that spoke of a warrior who faced death with open eyes. Peasants painted small circles on their doors, broken at the top, a mark that meant unfinished. And at night, farmers left bowls of rice in the fields, murmuring the same phrase. He died standing. Far from Edo, Daichi traveled from village to village, carrying nothing but a bundle of paper charms and the blackened hilt of Kiyosada. He no longer introduced himself. He no longer needed to. The story walked ahead of him. In a fishing town along the northern coast, he found an old woman repairing nets. When he greeted her, she smiled faintly. "You travel with a heavy shadow, child. Is it vengeance you carry?" He shook his head. "No. Memory," she nodded, fingers deft on the twine. "Memory is a quiet kind of vengeance." That night, Daichi stayed by her hearth. The smell of fish and smoke filled the air. The woman poured tea, rough but warm, and spoke of her son, a conscript who died in the famine the shogun had called divine correction. She wept, not loudly, but as if each tear knew its place. When she finished, she looked up. "They say your master's ashes turned to gold when they burned him. Do you believe it?" Daichi stared into the fire. The flames swayed, orange turning to blue. "Gold burns too easily," he said. "But I believe his truth survived the fire." The woman smiled. "Then you are his sword now." He did not answer. But when he left at dawn, she bowed low, pressing her forehead to the earth, not to him, but to the path he carried. As the months passed, more marks appeared, carved into temple beams, traced in dust upon statues, hidden beneath the lids of rice bowls. The empire became a garden of invisible rebellion, and Daichi, once a nameless courier, became a ghost of his own story, a wanderer whose shadow carried the memory of a man who dared to be human. One evening, atop a hill overlooking Kaga's valley, Daichi stopped to rest. Snow drifted softly through the pines, each flake catching faint traces of light from the distant villages. He knelt, brushing aside the snow until he found the soil beneath. Then, with slow, deliberate motion, he buried the hilt of Kiyosada. The ground was cold, unyielding, but he pressed until it took root. "Rest, my lord," he whispered. "Your blade has found its place." He remained there until the wind died. Then he bowed, once deeply, and stood. In that stillness, something inside him shifted. The fire that had once burned hot with grief now glowed steady and calm. He realized then that Renshiro's rebellion had never truly been about the shogun. It was about the line between obedience and conscience, a line men crossed every day without seeing it. And as he looked down the valley, where lanterns flickered like stars fallen to earth, Daichi understood the meaning of his master's last act. To stand was not to win. It was to refuse to kneel. He smiled, not proudly but peacefully. When dawn came, travelers on the road below swore they saw a boy in white robes walking east, leaving no footprints in the snow. Whether he lived or died, no one could say. But that spring, when the thaw came and the soil softened again, a single shoot of red maple grew where the hilt had been buried. And when the wind passed through its leaves, some said they heard a whisper, not of death, but of defiance carried forward. From the nearby marsh, a lone heron took flight, its wings cutting the dawn, like a brushstroke of living silence. Some said it circled once above the maple and vanished eastward, following the wind toward the sea. All warnings are seeds. If this story moved you, honor it with a like, and subscribe for more forgotten tales of Japan's warriors. Every voice keeps these legends alive.